Thanks, Philip. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Great to be at the conference. Frosty morning around the country, so good to see a good crowd. I'd thank the organisers for inviting me to chair this session. I'd also like to thank the organisers for picking such a useful photograph of me in the conference booklet. It's about, I don't think I've aged a bit in about 20 years, so that's a positive. Our first session is with Laurence Shalloo. Laurence, of course, needs no introduction, well known to you all, head of Moore Park, and I suppose the leader of all animal and grassland research in Teagasc. So Laurence's session, you want to make a raise up, Laurence, industry overview, making the most of our strengths and what's ahead in 2026. So we know there's challenges ahead. Laurence is going to address some of those, and the cost of production, I suppose, is the key message that Laurence is going to get out. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. We have plenty of time and we want plenty of questions. So over to you, Laurence.
Thanks, Aidan. And I don't know, for any of you that's seen the brochure, you think Aidan looks youthful. I had hair at one stage. So yeah, just thank the organisers for picking a picture that goes back about 25 years. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, you know, for any of you that looked at the flyer and said, holy Jesus Christ, an hour and a half with Aidan and myself, that's not going to happen, Aidan. An hour is probably as much as we're going to give this session, because, you know, there's a very important session on afterwards with 3 speakers, so we'll get a little bit more time. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, this is not going to be, you know, all on this side. We want you to do a bit of work. So this is an interactive session, so we're just going to put up, so if you could get out your phones and log on to Wi-Fi. The internet coverage isn't hectic in the room, so we want you to log on to the system. We have 3 Mentimeter questions throughout as we go through this process. So we'll flick them up at some stage, and we want you to be able to, I suppose, engage in that process. So there's 2 networks. There's one network, which is the guest network. There's no Wi-Fi password there. You can go in there if you like. This is the conference network, and the conference username and the conference password. So we'll leave it up for another couple of seconds. So the idea here is that you can engage in the process as we go through. So basically, we just want you to get connected, and then we'll pop up the questions as we go. Just, I suppose, this, I think we tried to do something like this last year, but weather prevented us. So Anya is just after coming in. I think, Anya, you did this last year. So, you know, given that this is our 3rd time, anything could happen here in terms of dealing with costs. I suppose, again, we're going to leave it up there for a second just for people. I suppose when we stand back at it, I think, Liz, it's fair to say that when this session was planned in the summer, early summer, it was going to be a really kind of happy moment and discussion. There wasn't going to be really that much friction. Costs weren't going to be a big issue at all because milk price was so high. And the world has changed quite dramatically, as we all know. And to be honest, and maybe this conversation will happen later as we go through the day, but to be honest, we don't really know how much, you know, where the floor is. It looks like potentially we're starting to hit the floor now in terms of the markets, in terms of what has happened this week with the New Zealand auction up 7.5% and some other auctions starting to turn as well. But we don't know. So it's important as you take, you know, as we go through this journey here, where will milk price be in March, in June, in August? To be honest, the honest answer, when you stand back and you take, we don't know. So you know, I think it's really important for all of us that we take control within our own businesses. So I think anyone still challenged with this? Everyone okay? So I'd say we're good. We'll flick over to the presentation now. I told you anything could happen. So we're good. So cost control on farm, the challenge for 2026. That's what we're going to talk about. And I'm going to hit you with numbers here fairly quickly. And I just want to, the first part of this is just really to set the scene and say what has happened. Just remind ourselves what has happened over the last number of years. Then we'll start getting into costs, start to get into the factors driving cost of production and cost of production change. Talk a little bit then about break-even milk price and what that means and how we maybe, how we're performing. And then we look at strategies for 2026. So we'll keep this relatively light. So the numbers here are not overly important. It's just no harm to remind ourselves what the picture is and look at where the numbers have gone in the last, you know, between the average was 7 to 9 to 2020, 24, 25. So in 07 to 09, we produced 5.9 billion litres of milk. We had 1 million cows. Milk fat percentage was 3.8. Milk protein was 3.3, and we were producing 363,000 tonnes of milk solids. That's the industry in Ireland. We all know what happened in between. We got the signal that milk quotas were going in 2007. And just kind of paint a picture, where we were after 2016, we were producing 6.7 billion litres, 1.35 million cows, just over 4.1% fat, 3 so huge progress being made here in terms of solids, 517,000 tonnes. We bring ourselves on then to 2022, produced 8.8 billion litres of milk, roughly 1.6 million cows. Cow numbers continued to increase over that full period. Fat percentage up by 0.5, from 3.8 up to 4.27 over that period of time. Protein percentage up by 0.2 from 3.33 up to 3. And 711,000 tonnes. And to be honest, we all, after that point and after what we saw in 23 and 24, particularly 23, so in the last 10 years, 15 years, 23 was the first year that we declined in milk output. All right? So milk output in 23 was 8.5 billion litres, with similar cow numbers. Fat continued, protein continued to make progress. So in 2023, we produced 680,000 tonnes. Recovery 24, growth again. So just to paint the picture, in 2025 the expectation is that we've produced about 8.9 billion litres, or about 730,000 tonnes of milk solids. So that's over double where we were in the 07 to 09 period food harvest. And just remind ourselves, policy for food harvest was a 50% growth by 2020. Really strong performance at farm level. What has happened in terms of family farm income, and this is family farm income from 2012 to 25 projected. So family farm income on a dairy farm, you can see from that graph, is trending up, as you would expect. And we've obviously seen the peaks in year like 2022, where the average dairy farmer had a family farm income, and that's returned to own resources, land and labour, of about 150,000 euros. But we also can't forget 2023. 2023 was the only year, when you look at the numbers and you look at, when I talk later about drawings, 2023 was the only year in the last 15 where we were below our let's say projected cost of living or our family farm income drawings. So 2023 is really important that we remember it in our mindset. I'm pretty sure a lot of you remember the struggles that were there in 23, and that should frame where we go for the rest of, as we look into 2026. And obviously then the big recovery in 2024 and 25. So the expectation is family farm income about 140,000 euros in 2025. And I just stuck that in there because maybe it's about making you guys feel better. But the alternatives, in terms of family farm income, even though massive increases in family farm income on the beef systems and the sheep systems this year, relative to dairy farming, and I know, that there is a huge difference in family farming. So that's all I want to talk about in terms of industry stats. Second thing I want to talk about is cost of production. So what has happened in terms of cost of production? And what I've done here is I have 2012 up to 2020, and I have in this graph cost of production in cent per litre and cost of production in euros per kilo milk solids. So what we're showing here is that essentially no change in cost of production. So we have all this dairy expansion that happened over the period, 2010, 2012 to 2020, and cost of production, if anything, dropped. That's amazing. That is unbelievable to see what has happened in terms of, all that has been done at farm level and cost of production decline. But we also know that the story is not rosy since then. We know that cost of production have increased, I suppose, dramatically, and we all know Ukraine and whatever happened to drove a lot of that increase. But we're seeing that cost of production have increased quite dramatically since 2020. And we'll talk about the exact numbers in a second. But we're seeing that those costs have obviously driven on faster than we would have liked or we would have expected. And to be honest, they have increased more than our competitors. So that's something we need to be really worried about. Why have they increased more than our competitors? So no competitor would have seen the level of static that we showed up to 2020, but they're also showing slightly less growth than we have seen in the period 21 to 23. So let's try to break that out and see why that has happened. So first again, cost of production in cent per litre. And the red line this time is the agriculture price input price index. So that is essentially, CSO publish it on an annual basis. It's a very nice index. It just shows you where the costs of, for example, concentrate, fertilizer, whatever, are going and where they've gone in the last number of years. So you can see here that that line is pretty static. So there has been no increase in the period 2012 up to 2020. There was no increase in input costs. So maybe I was giving you a small bit too much credit there a second ago when costs didn't increase. But at the same time, we have to remember that while those costs didn't increase, you were expanding and you were doubling or increasing the size of the businesses. So there is credit to you. So input prices didn't change. Again, same slide. We look at then cent per litre going up, up to over 37, 38 cent a litre in 2023, back down to 35.5 in 24. So we can see those increases in cost, and we can see that was driven by the agriculture price index. So the agriculture price index increased from pretty much static up by 50%. So that went up. Ukraine, you all know the history here. So it went up, but then it has also come back down. So the agriculture price index increased by 50%, but today it stands at 27% ahead of 2020. But our cost of production are not 27%, they're 43% ahead of 2020. So the big question for me, and I think it's one we need to figure out as we go through today, is 100% accept cost of production going up with the agricultural input price index. That makes perfect sense. But why have cost of production not come down as the agricultural price index has come down? And that's my challenge to you. What has happened at farm level? What has changed? Why are we not tracking the agricultural price index? So then we break out and we look at a little bit more detail in terms of what has happened, some of the costs, and try to break out and understand why some costs have increased and some, at different levels. So what I have here is, we're saying it has all happened between 2020 and 2024. So what I'm trying to do now is figure out what has happened. So the first thing there is your direct costs. Your direct costs have increased from €1.79 per kilo milk solids. They peaked at 2.74 in 2023. They're back down to 2.62 in 2024. So they've increased by 83 cents, right? So why have direct costs increased by 83 cents? Your overhead costs have increased by 53 cents. So again, total costs have increased by €1.36. So the question is, and what we're going to try and decipher is, why have those costs increased? So the first thing we're going to deal with is direct costs. So direct costs that we said have increased by 46%, and that's 83 cents. So where did that 83 cent come from? So we're going to talk about the two main drivers. So 75% of the increase in direct costs came from two variables. First one, pasture and forage, and that's fertilizer, it's reseeding, it's silage purchases and silage costs. So they've increased by 29% or 24 cents per kilo milk solids, and your concentrate costs have increased by 38 cents or 46%. So the direct costs, we can explain the increase in direct costs with two variables. 75% of that increase with two variables, pasture and forage and concentrate. So, that's where we need to be thinking now as we challenge ourselves to, I suppose, focus on getting some of that ground back. And we need to be really clear here. The input price index is up by 25%. So we're not going to be able to get back to where we were in 2020. That's impossible. But can we get back to where the agricultural price index was sitting? So I want to focus, and that's where we're going to focus for a lot of the discussion, and actually the session after us is going to focus on a lot of this as well. Pasture and forage, 24 cents per kilo milk solids, concentrate, 38 cents, right? So they're the big increase in direct costs. In fixed costs then, the increase was 53 cents, and I suppose there's 5 variables explain 75% of this. So first one is energy and fuel. Energy and fuel is 13 cents per kilo milk solids. Machinery depreciation is 12 cents. So the two of those explain a large chunk of the fixed cost increase. And when I'm talking to farmers, the question often comes back, No, it's all about hired labour now. Hired labour is really driving my cost production increase. Well, the National Farm Survey representative data is saying that yes, hired labour has gone up. It's up by 5 cents per kilo milk solids, but it doesn't explain a huge amount of the increase. And the other thing that comes back is rent. I'm renting in much more land, and it's costing me much more now. And again, when we look at the numbers, it's 5 cents. Again, it doesn't explain the vast majority of the increases. So I want you to think as you go through today and over the weekend. There's 7 variables that have driven 75% of the cost. So there are target variables. There are target areas that we need to go after. So pasture and forage costs and concentrate costs, so they're the 2 direct cost ones. And then to a lesser extent, you have energy and fuel, hard labour, rent, and depreciation. So putting it all together, and again, it's important to acknowledge that even though costs have gone up that length, output has gone up more. So the actual income, and we've seen it in the previous slide a couple of minutes ago, your family farm income has gone up quite dramatically, obviously, on in the years like 2022, even in 2021 and in 2024, and obviously 25 is going to be a really, really positive year. So the output increase has been greater. The problem is now, as we face into 2026, that comfort blanket of milk price having a 5 on it, looks like it's not going to be there in certainly for 2026. So my challenge to you, and it's a slide I put up a few minutes ago, my challenge to you is completely accept costs increasing as the agricultural input price index went up. My challenge is, why have costs not come down similar to that, when the agricultural input price index came down? So costs should go up when the agricultural input price index goes up, but why aren't costs coming down when the agricultural input price? Because all over the other years we were tracking the agricultural input price index very well. And just because, I suppose it's probably no harm to be a little bit positive every so often. It doesn't come easy, to be honest. But if you look at 2024 and 2025, 25 is an amazing year. Has been an amazing year. Current accounts are obviously for the vast majority in a positive state going into 2026. So that's positive. So even though costs have increased, that milk price effect has been huge. So the next thing I just want to chat about is the factors driving cost of production. So I suppose really what I want to get to here is, has anything changed? The Moore Park message, that, very much focused on pasture, very much focused on minimising proportion of bought-in feed. And the question was, has that changed? Are we out of sync? Has something seriously gone different? So what I have here is a paper that was published by Liam Hanrahan in 2017-18, which showed the relationships between, using the National Farm Survey data between 2008 and 2015, what was happening in terms of what was driving profitability, cost of production, etc. So just to remind ourselves, right, cost of production and net profit, so there was a statistically significant, very strong relationship between cost of production and profitability, and it was negative. Obviously, as costs went up, profit per hectare reduced. The second one was pasture utilisation and net profit. Again, statistically significant. This is based on National Farm Survey data, representative data, very robust data. Statistically significant, strong relationship, positive. As grass utilisation went up, profit went up per hectare. Proportion of bought-in feed and cost, again, statistically significant, very strong relationship and positive. So as proportion of bought-in feed goes up, costs go up. Next one is proportion of bought-in feed and net profit. Again, statistically significant, so really important in terms of what was driving the numbers. Strong relationship and negative. As proportion of bought-in feed goes up, profitability drops. Next one is milk yield and profit. So this is milk volume, litres, and profit, non-significant. So again, increasing milk yield per cow has no effect on profit. And some people struggle with that and they get upset. They actually get pretty upset at saying that. But that's what the stats say. That's what the data says. That's not what I'm saying. That's what the actual data. And there was a statistically significant relationship between milk solids per cow, but that relationship was weak. So basically, you'd have to increase milk solids massively to have a strong impact on profitability per hectare. So that's what we had said in the past, right? So what we wanted to do then was basically update all that analysis and say, does that still hold? Are we still today right to be saying that? So we took the National Farm Survey, we took 23 and 24 data. We wanted to identify the factors driving cost of production. We wanted to look at the factors driving net profit per hectare. And we wanted to look at the factors driving pasture utilisation. So that was what we were trying to do. So what this slide basically shows is the relationship, and again, this is based on 23 and 24 data. So what it shows here is that 44% of the variation in profit per hectare is explained by cost per kilo milk solids. And you say to yourself, Jesus, this lad's a genius. Like, he's after saying, like, cost of production relates to profit. But there's a very strong relationship, so we can explain 44% of the variation in profit per hectare by cost per kilo milk solids. So that was 24. So 24 was a reasonably high milk price, or a reasonably good. We were on the 50 mark in terms of milk price. And for every €1 increase in cost of production, we were reducing profit by €724 per hectare. Right? So every euro increase in cost of production, reducing profit by 724. What happens when you look at 2023? So 23 was a poorer milk price, even though it was a good milk price year, relatively. When you look at the history of milk price, it was a relatively good milk price year. I think there was somewhere around 44, 45 cent a litre received at farm level. One thing that happens here is that relationship gets much stronger. So now we can explain 67% of net profit per hectare by cost per kilo milk solids. How the numbers affect, so it's still every €1 increase in cost of production reduced profit by roughly €800 per hectare this time. So that relationship didn't change, but we were able to explain a lot more of the variation on profit per hectare by cost of production in a year when milk price is poor. So thinking about that, looking at 2026, we have one message: focus on cost of production. Cost of production, cost of production, cost of production. 66% of the variation, 67% of the variation in the profit that you get this year will be explained by cost of production. So really important that we double down. And I suppose, again, another significant relationship was the relationship between proportionate bought-in feed and cost of production. So again, as bought-in feed increases, cost of production increases. So that's what the relationships looked like. So the last, I just want to summarise. So in the previous work we had said that every 1 tonne utilised per hectare was worth €173, and that was based on 7 years. So based on 2 years data, 23 and 24, every extra tonne of grass that we utilise is worth €195. Now, Michael O'Donovan will show you a slide in a second that shows 2024 data, and that figure was €330 per hectare. Different data set, but when I did the same analysis with 24 data from the National Farm Survey, it showed a figure of roughly €300. So they're very much aligned. So basically between over 23-24, the average increase in profit for every extra tonne of pasture utilised was €195. And again, the same story: as proportion of bought-in feed or concentrate comes into the system, profit per hectare drops, and profit per kilo of milk solids drops. Same story in terms of cost of production. As proportion of bought-in feed increases, essentially cost of production go up, right? And I'm not going to dwell on this because it's the same as what we showed in the last previous slides. And in terms of the drivers of pasture utilisation, and you'll hear more about it in the next session, but pasture utilisation is, key driver of it is stocking rate. Milk solids had a positive relationship, so if we can produce more milk solids from pasture, that'll increase utilisation. That's obviously makes sense. And in terms of concentrate, every 1 kilo increase in concentrate that we put in reduced grass utilisation by 1 kilo. So a very direct relationship. So I suppose to summarise, and I've spent 7 or 8 minutes talking about kind of looking back, nothing changed. So we update the analysis with 23 and 24 data, nothing changes, right? So essentially, the same message as we were saying 5 years ago is the same message today, and the analysis and the data is telling us that. But you take that in the round, you take it that increasing grass utilisation is good, reducing proportion of bought-in feed or increasing it is bad. But if we look at the numbers, since 22, our utilisation is dropping and our proportion of bought-in feed is trending up. So, why? The question is why? If we look at in terms of pasture utilisation, again, and the numbers here are not important because they tell the same story. Concentrate feed levels per cow going up, proportion of bought-in feed going up, grass utilisation declining in the last 2 years. Luckily, I suppose, and we need to be real here, and again, in the next session, you'll hear more about grass growth. But the reality is we have had 2 tough years in 23-24 from a grass production point of view. Pasture-based data showing 12.3 growing in 23, 11.8 growing in 24, and 22 was a tough year as well. But there was a strong recovery for most, not all, in 2025, and I suppose that's a positive in terms of the overall numbers. So the expectation we have is that if it's grass growth driving it, well then we expect that pasture utilisation will go up in 2025 and proportion of bought-in feed will decline. But based on conversations I've had with industry and with individual farmers, I'm not so sure that's what happened. So how do we I suppose link both? So our question is, and our challenge, and we're going to get you to get out the phones now because we're going to challenge you to do a small little bit here in terms of to explain, maybe just to help us with our understanding of why these numbers are maybe going the direction they're going in. So we're questioning, why, if we accept that pasture utilisation and proportion of bought-in feed are the drivers, why we're going the wrong direction in these 2 metrics. So for those of you that are logged in, the Mentimeter, so you have 2 options. You could just take a picture of this thing here in front of us. I call it a YR code. I think it's a QR code. YR is a sauce, I think, actually. But anyway, it's a QR code. So if you could take a picture of the QR code, or go into mentimeter.com, and the code for the one we're working on here is 27381821. So 27381821. So mentimeter.com, or the code, or just take a picture of this thing. Everyone comfortable enough? Slow, is it? Okay. Bit like myself. Yeah. So if you want the Wi-Fi, you probably get faster. You might get faster. You might hopefully get faster. Okay. So is the first question up? Okay. So it's a really simple question. Does this analysis surprise you? So we have 21 answers. 32, 30, oh, it's flying up. We have 30. Aidan, you're not allowed now. Okay. Right. So it doesn't, okay. So Aidan, what's it saying?
It's saying that the data doesn't surprise them. Which is what it says on the screen, Laurence.
Right, so I checked that Aidan can read, lads.
Yeah, it's telling us that there's no great surprise that the data was telling us all along not to do it, but farmers did it anyway.
Yeah.
And the question there is why.
Yeah, so that's where we're going next. And this is not about, this is obviously all anonymous, but this is about all figuring out how we correct this journey we're on, to kind of put on the jets going backwards and fix it. This is not about trying to figure out, we honestly wanted to know, was it that we were not communicating this well, or that, this kind of tells me we're okay on the communication side, Ed, so we can relax on that one. But there's something else, right? So I think that's good. So we probably have half the room coming in there now. So that's good. So the next question. So now this is the challenging one. You told us it wasn't our fault, so now it's your fault. So we want to know why. This one might be a little bit trickier. And there's no wrong answer here. There's no wrong answer. interested in that nervous laugh, Aidan?
Is there anyone in regulation views?
Drought, weather. We've established you can read it, so do you want to take them?
Milk price, weather. Yeah, so we can probably merge drought and weather together effectively. It's the same one. Poor grassland management. Stocking rate. Inflation, yeah, so inflation is mentioned. But really, Laurence, your figure on inflation says that, so go back to it, 27% is the inflationary figure.
Yeah.
The actual figure on farm is 43%.
Exactly. So, and that's what worries us. To be honest, if the inflation figure went to 60% and costs were at 60%, I'd be less worried than the disentangling of both. That's what worries me, is the disentangling. So I read it here that the milk price, once milk price drops, it's just easy enough to solve that one. So that one solved. So
now, if we were to put drought and weather together, they'd be bigger than milk price. So I suppose this, for context, whoever answers most questions, the word gets bigger. So
Teagasc is in there.
Can we get more support for Teagasc?
This is like Merkur, sir. We get a voting system. I don't see the Farmers' Journal there, Ian.
No, we held our line.
He held the line. Okay, I'm wondering where. I'm not sure that could be said for everyone in the journal, Ian. But maybe they never had a line somewhere. Okay, that's brilliant. We have 160 people in. Teagasc's getting bigger, in.
Keep going.
We could probably link grass growth to weather too.
Bad habits.
Yeah.
No hassle. But the hassle was like, if it was no hassle, it was no hassle 10 years ago either. So what has changed?
Yeah. Stocking rate is bigger.
But now, has stocking rate increased, Laurence, over the last number of years?
So since 22, stocking rate would have dropped. So stocking rate would have been increasing. No argument. Stocking rate would have increased up to 2022, but since then it's dropped.
But given the reduction in grass growth during 22, 23, 24, your stocking rate is actually a lot higher on a comparative basis.
To be honest, milk price is milk price in 22 was pretty big. Yeah, poor grass. So again, that should tee up the next session. So okay, done. So that's really good. We're going to bring you back to this again at the very end, just for 2026. So really useful, and it's really helpful in terms of painting the picture in terms of where the numbers are going. So the next, we have two other pieces. One kind of a chunky piece, and the next thing then is the finish up with strategies for 2026. So the break-even milk price is something that we have done a number of times, and it's basically, what are you trying to do with break-even price? You're trying to reduce your break-even price to a point where you reduce the, I suppose, exposure you have when we get years like 2023 or potentially 2026 or 2009 that some of you remember. In fairness, looking around the room, a lot of people won't remember 2009, but what we're trying to do with break-even price, by reducing your break-even price, you're reducing your exposure when you have tough years. So 2009, milk price and cost of production were the same. 2015, 16, very tough times as well in terms of milk price and cost of production. And 2023, 23 became really raw in the second half of 23 and into early 2024. And we need to, I suppose, ensure that we kind of keep that in the back of our minds as we go forward. So I suppose why break-even point is important for your business. It clearly, I suppose it puts the focus on ensuring that you're less exposed in those downturns. So and just be crystal clear here. When we talk about nobody should be looking to break even. You might be looking to in a tough year, but nobody should have a business objective to break even, right? Just to be crystal clear on that. So the overall objective obviously has to, maximize your return, whatever it is your objective is. but in a tough year, you're using break even to survive. Knowing your break even price, and that's where we're going here, we're going to put it in front of you, that understanding your break even price will be important in ensuring that you're in a viable place and you can take things in the short and long term. So what do you need? You need surplus cash. So that's something that's generated. And it's a really simple number that's from your business. You need milk deliveries, you need milk solids percentages. Why do you need milk solids percentages? For a lot of farmers, the increase in fat and protein percentages is worth significant money. Even on the average farm, fat and protein percentages probably adding 3 to 4 cents a litre onto the bottom line. And essentially what you're trying to do is adjust the base price or the break-even price to get to a point of zero. So you're calculating what that is for your business. So it's a relatively simple exercise, but it just does paint a picture of where you are. We include drawings and tax. So in 2015, I took a figure of 55,000. I could have taken a figure of 40,000. But there's more than one person involved in a dairy farm. So what we did was we took a figure of 55,000 and we inflated it based on inflation. So between 2015 and 2024, 2025, we took inflation into account. The important thing with inflation, and the way we all talk about the cost of living crisis, one of the major reasons we have a cost of living crisis, or that we are feeling the presence of a cost of living crisis, is between 2012 and 2020, 21, we had no inflation. Nationally, we had very, very, very little inflation. So cost of production, costs weren't rising. But we all know that we had a over 20% increase in costs in the period after that. So on average, between 2010 and 25, inflation is not high. Just to be clear, our costs have not, to live, our living costs, our own costs to survive haven't increased dramatically. But what we had was no inflation and then very high inflation. So just to kind of put that into perspective. So we factored that into the numbers. So what does all this mean? So for 2015, taking the National Farm Survey, your cash costs of production were €3.33 per kilo milk solids. There was about €1.95 in other gross output, that includes single farm payment, whatever. Capital repayments to the bank was 55 cents per kilo milk solids. Capital development, so the work that was being done on farm was, and that capital repayment was roughly €20,000. Work that was being done on farm was about 57 cents, which is about €24,000. Bank loan capital repayments was 70 cents. Drawings and tax based on that €55,000 was €1.78, and the break-even price was €3.39 per kilo milk solids. And Aidan asked me earlier, what's that in cent per litre? So cent per litre on a base price of 3.3 and 3.6 was 24.5 cents a litre. That's what it was in 2015. We bring that on to 2020 and 2021. So the first thing to say is that between 2015 and 2020, it didn't increase that much at all. There was changes in between. Capital development was going up. Loan repayments, capital repayments were going down. Businesses were growing, so the actual capital repayments to the bank hadn't changed at all. They were roughly 20,000 per year, but you had a lot more milk diluting that figure. And drawings and tax went down per kilo milk solids because you were producing extra milk, but you had no inflation. So that 55,000 wasn't increasing. So cost of production were €3.68, or sorry, the break-even price was €3.68, roughly maybe 27 cents a litre. We go on to 2021 and we're starting to see inflation starting to kick. So that break-even price has gone to €4.10, and then we bring it on and we follow it up. So it's gone from €4.10 in 2021 up to €5.62 in 2024. So €5.62 in 24. So we've gone from a figure of 24 cent a litre base, 3.3 and 3.6, not including VAT, up to a figure closer to 38 cent a litre break-even price. So that's what's happened based on the National Farm Survey. However, one consolation is when we look at 25, it looks like that break-even price will be down. Why? Cost of production probably pretty static or not changing hugely. Livestock sales up, I suppose, pretty strongly on dairy farms. So we put it all together. We have the break-even price in 2015 at 24.5 cent a litre, base price 3.3 and 3.6. In 24, that's gone to 38 cent a litre, 3.3 and 3.6. By 25, we expect it to have dropped to potentially 36 cent a litre. That's just giving you the ballpark numbers of what has happened in terms of base price. So our break-even price. So, that is mainly driven by what has happened between 2020 and 2024 for two reasons. One, the drawings and tax have gone up by that 20% because of inflation. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that cost of production, cash cost of production have gone up. So the last section, and this is just one slide, about strategies for 2026. So what can you do on your farm in 26 to reduce that break-even price? And it's not all about cost of production. What can you do to reduce that break-even price? I'm putting up a set of numbers here. Someone is going to start firing stuff at me, but this is, potentially what's possible on farm. So current cost of production are €4.49. What I'm saying is, and that means the average. So that means that half farmers are above that €4.49. So what I'm saying here is that if we just take pasture and forage, current costs are 3 cents per kilo milk solids. For some farmers, I'm saying they should not reduce pasture and forage costs. Maybe they should maybe they should spend more on pasture and forage. Maybe they're not growing, maybe soil fertility isn't good enough. Maybe there should be more money put into pasture and forage on some farms. So that's the first thing. So, but for some, there's scope to reduce that. The second one we talk about is energy and fuel. I'm hearing about all this investment in solar, and if that can't help you in terms of reducing your break-even or taking out some of that cost, you shouldn't be investing in it. So, and the other one is the energy provider. Obviously, some people do, and maybe lots of people in this room change their energy provider. Most farmers don't. So again, there's big savings to be got there. So purchase feed. So I put in a figure of 40 to 50 cent. So less than half of what's currently being spent on concentrate. So if you took 40 cent per kilo milk solids out from purchase feed, essentially you're talking about roughly somewhere around 160, 170, maybe 180 euros per cow on purchase feed. And you'd say that's a huge amount. It still leaves over 300 euros per cow on purchase concentrate. So it's not like, we have killed it completely. There's still probably potentially a ton of concentrate in that system. Remembering that we're over 1.4, we'll be probably over very close to 1.4 ton in 2015. So there's huge scope here. But it won't happen, if you take out that feed, let's say that's if you take out 400 kilos of concentrate at an average stocking rate of 2.1, 2.2, that's a ton of dry matter. So you either have to produce an extra ton of dry matter in terms of forage, or you have to reduce your stocking rate. And they're the types of questions I think that people need to look at. And other cost categories then obviously have gone up as well. So we're saying that there is potential looking across every cost category. And I'm not being prescriptive. This is going to be dependent on the individual farm. The second thing that I think we need to focus on is livestock sales, and this is happening, and there's huge progress being made in terms of sex semen, and there's a cost associated with that, but that's a cost that's probably going to give a good return in the long term. There is potential here to get higher livestock receipts. Obviously you've got them in 25. Is there scope to even push that further in 2026? So there is huge potential here to focus on the valued calf, etc. in terms of its return to the dairy farmer. And then the final piece is capital development. And at the moment, it's an amazing what has happened in terms of capital development. So in 2015, the average dairy farmer was spending 20,000 euros a year on capital development. That figure now is 50,000 euros. In 2020, the average capital development, about a third of it was probably buildings, a third of it was machinery, and maybe a third of it was land reclamation or land purchase. Today, if we go back to 2024, about 70% of it was machinery. So we've gone completely other ways. So there is scope, I think, to pull back that capital development and still have significant capital development. I've only taken half of it. I haven't even taken half of that capital development cost from the system. So just to summarise, and we're going to go to Mentimeter for one question to finish up. Just to stand back from it, the dairy industry has been completely transformed in the last 10 years. You look at what the industry today versus where it was when milk quotas came in 2015. Just think about some of that family farm income. Just think about some of that profitability that has happened in the intervening period. And to be honest, everything has really gone well, up, from a cost point of view up to 2020. How do we now pull some of that back? There was little to no cost. So an amazing story in terms of cost up to 2020. Input cost inflation up by 50% by 22, but that's only 25, 26% today. So why are our costs 43% higher? And that's the big question for us, and that's the challenge to you here today, is why have they disentangled? And just to be clear, you told us you knew anyway, so that's great, but the cost, the drivers of profitability at farm level, the key things to focus on at farm level have not changed. Have not changed. They're the key ones. So the things that we're going the wrong direction on are going to bring us in the wrong direction from a profitability point. The break-even milk price has increased by over €1.80, but there's huge scope at farm level to work on that. And that's not about misery and poverty and whatever. There's huge scope to pull that out and still have a very profitable dairy business, where we focus on, some of it's going to come from costs, and there's a challenge there. Some of it's getting more for example, livestock sales. And the third one then is in terms of capital development. Maybe 2026 it's not that it's not a good year to do capital development, but it might be a good year to do it from cash flow. So, that's something that I suppose we need to think about. So, destination is in our own hands. Nobody can, it's very hard to understand what costs to go without a budget. So for me, develop a budget, make a plan, and implement the plan. And it sounds very easy, but every plan will be specific to an individual farm. So putting that plan in place, there's no point in me going developing a plan for you. It mightn't be right for you. So every plan should be and will be different. So we're back to Mintimeter for one question. One question, which is so we're just asking in this is what actions are you going to take on your farm to manage lower milk prices in 2026. So, raise stock range.
Pray for rain.
Yeah. Budget. Solar panels are going to help, yeah. More fertilizer, good. Utilization, did I say good?
Feed less meal is by far the strongest Laurence.
Yeah. And it's in 3 or 4 different ways.
Be mean.
Ask Fogarty. Oh, sorry, yeah, Fogarty. David, no pressure. Yeah. Okay, we don't need to kill it.
Improve grass utilisation.
Yeah.
How's that going to happen though, Laurence? How are we going to achieve that?
Well, I think the first start is feeding less meal. So we think about, all of our data tells us there's a very high, substitution rate, 50, 60, 70%. So you feed an extra kilo of concentrate, you're going to substitute that for pasture in the sward. So the most important start is feeding less meal. Right?
Is there evidence to say that grass quality has deteriorated since we started feeding more concentrate? We're always told it would, but protein levels are still increasing.
Yeah, but I suppose it's very hard, Aidan, to break out the effect of weather from grass quality and whatever. But the general trend, you'd have to see that it would. The benefit of having higher quality, by feeding less meal, there is a response to concentrate, but by having better grass quality, your milk output reduction might be very, very small.
Okay, we'll open up the floor. You're finished, Laurence. Open to the floor for questions. So anyone that has a question, put your hand up and we get a microphone to you. Can you just go back, Laurence, when you're on the thing, to the break-even price from 2015 to 2025? That slide that you had up, can we get that back up? So just go through this again now, just break it down for me slowly, because as you heard earlier on, I'm going to tick. So the cash cost of production, so that's what you're spending in cash. So depreciation is not included in that.
No.
So for this year, you're expecting it to be 485.
Yeah, 25, yeah.
Yeah, so then you're adding on then your the gross output other, so that's your livestock sales and your
single farm payment, whatever else,
Capital payments are coming off that then, so that's what you're paying back to the bank in principal and in interest.
No, just principal.
Just principal. Interest is already taken account.
Interest is in the cash cost already,
Cap development, so capital expenditure.
So if we look at the big increases in, you look at the source and application of funds, and you look at where the money is going on a dairy farm. That was 20,000 euros or 22,000 euros in 2015. It's closer to 50,000 euros now. Yeah. So that has increased, and some of that was a catch-up, and there was a need for some of this development. But the fact that it's now moved over large, higher proportion of it being machinery, we'd have to question, and particularly in 26, is that something that should be looked at?
Yeah. So in simple terms here, it's 0.95 is almost €1. Yeah. If you have 100 cows doing 500,000 milk solids, that's 50,000 kilos of milk solids. 500 milk solids, 50,000 milk solids, that's 50,000 euros.
And one really interesting thing is, if we look at the capital development, like in 2023, when things were really tough, it didn't drop that much. There was significant capital development on there.
Capital introduced is your bank loan drawdown, money you brought in. Then what? The 148, €1.50 almost is drawings, tax. That's running the household.
Yeah, family. Absolutely.
So that 528 is the break even. Now I think milk price for 25 will be 6.10, 6.20, something in there. So there's almost a clear euro there after everything else is spent that we expect farmers will have in the bank.
Absolutely, and I'm pretty sure if you look around, the room, you'll get that vibe. Current account, you talk to banks, current accounts are in a very strong position with all the stuff that's gone out in 2025. Yeah. So that's a real number that's there in the system from 25.
So put that 528 in context, cent per litre at base solids.
So base solids, that 528 is something around 36 cent a litre base price. 3.3 and 3.6. It was over 30 in 24, it was over 38. But because we expect better livestock sales, and now I could be wrong, there could be more capital development done in 2025 than I've factored in here. But just to give you a kind of a broad number, I expect the break-even price to have come down, maybe 2 cent a litre in 2025.
So that's that 36 cent is the tier lawn price at the moment.
Yeah.
So that's scary because they're telling us there's more milk price cuts to come. Oh, very quiet. Laurence, while we're waiting, this data set, where is this from?
So this is National Farm Survey. So essentially what it's going on since 1973. So essentially it's actually an EU legal requirement for Ireland to collect this data set. And it's a representative data set, so it's not random. So essentially CSO provide codes to Teagasc in terms of representative farms. I'm pretty sure there's probably farmers in this audience that are part of it. And essentially it's 330 dairy farms, about 1,200 farms in total. And there's a recorder on these farms collecting the information.
It's not profit monitored.
It's not profit monitored, no. But to be honest, Aidan, when we look at, and Mick will have it on a slide later, when we look at the comparison of, for example, the impact of grass utilisation on profit, they're very similar in any one particular year.
Thank you, Laurence. I'm wondering if you have consideration given in all of this to see if all of our parameters are correct over the time, and I'm thinking like EBI. Is that working correctly? Is there any blemish in this that's a complication? Regulation, maybe the amount of fertiliser that we have available to ourselves on the indices, things like that. Is there any other parameters outside of just bad decision making by farmers that could be playing into this?
Yeah. Excellent question, Conor. And the point here is, I did not probably say bad decision making, to be honest. What I'm saying is that the trend is going in maybe the wrong direction for the last couple of years, and we're wondering why that is ourselves. We were wondering, is it the message wasn't getting through? So we're confident based on this group that message is getting through. So it has to be something else. Just go back to your questions in terms of EBI. We've just updated analysis of the EBI comparing it to profit. So EBI is still doing what it was doing. It's been hugely valuable. We published a paper at the journal at the Dairy Conference that showed us that it's been worth 5.2 billion. It's worth roughly 600 million euros a year now. So potential in terms of profit. So it's probably not the EBI. So in terms of regulation, Conor, I think what is driving that reduction in grass growth, and we would have said up to 2025 that maybe this reduced fertiliser is driving it, but yes, we have had some increase in fertiliser in 2025, but grass growth is ahead now than it has been in the previous 10 years. So regulation, we're within the new regulations now, and grass growth in 2025 was as good as it's been in 7 or 8, 10 years. So regulation, can't really say. It was probably, if we stand back and look at, fertiliser prices went nuts in 22, there was probably an overreaction at that point, and that probably also had an impact on the overall system. I'm less worried about looking back and saying what caused it. for me, looking forward is the important thing now. And we know now this is an issue. What can we do to fix it? That's where hopefully we can get to.
And Laurence, just maybe some of the options available to farmers, let's say, to cut costs. So obviously feed has gone up by 46%, fertiliser by 29%, fertiliser and pasture costs, I suppose. You mentioned the feed already, so you can cut it by, whatever you said, 400 kilos less feed going in, and you're still going to feed a tonne.
Yeah.
Is that your Teagasc benchmark now, or is there more to come off that?
Yeah. I was trying to bring people with us. So
I thought 400 was the target, not cutting by 400.
Yeah. As long as it's 400 in the discussion, it's important. No, right. So the roadmaps are very clear. We're updating them again at the moment, or we've them nearly updated, and we're saying that the profitability will be maximised at somewhere around a half a tonne. You need some concentrate in the system, and so the roadmap figure hasn't changed. It's a half a tonne, and luckily, by coincidence or whatever, John is going to be up later on, and John and Kevin, I'd say, is probably not a huge lot different. They're managing with something similar in terms of concentrate. But I suppose we have to also admit that milk yields have gone up quite substantially. So if we are going to survive with a half a tonne of concentrate, we also have to look at stocking rate or grow more grass. Yeah. That's going to be the challenge. Yeah.
And what figure would you say per cow for consumption of grass? And that plus that 500 kilos of concentrate.
So if we look at, if we look at silage and grazing together, pull the two of them together, for your target system there would say of whatever, and we have to put a milk solids on it to say what the diet would be. Let's say you're talking about 490, 500 kilos of milk solids, whatever that figure is. You're talking about a total diet of 5.3, 5.4 tonnes of dry matter in that animal. So if it's a half a tonne of concentrate, you're needing to get in somewhere between 4.9, 5 tonne of forage, whether that's pasture or silage.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take a question at the back. Michael, yeah.
Could you give us a bit more background on the livestock sales and things? I mean, over the last number of years, we've been told more or less to ignore it, that our main thing is obviously driving up more milk, getting milk solids. But to be relying on it now, could you give a bit more background into where the costs are coming from? Yeah. And another thing just to note, it was kind of disappointed to see it was just a figure you had up, not asking the question, but your protein over the last number of years, they haven't increased an awful lot to this time. But the main question is about background on the livestock sales.
Yeah, so just I might deal with the protein first and then we can go back. To be honest, I stand back and I look at those numbers and I say, protein is pretty static for 3 or 4 years. 2025 has been a good year on protein. We're probably very close to 3.6. So like if you stand back and look at where we were in 2008-9 at 3.25 or 3.2, we've huge progress made on protein. Yes, we've made a lot more progress on fat, but those numbers are scary when you stand back and you look at that across the guts of 9 billion litres and you look at 0.6 of an increase in fat, maybe 0.3 in protein. That's somewhere between 350 and 400 million euros a year that's in your pocket. And that's one of the key things we have to keep doubling down on. And that's probably, focus on making sure we have good grass in the system, making sure that our genetics are able to deliver is really, really important. And I think the EBI has delivered there. Secondly, livestock sales, we're all looking at what has happened in terms of beef, and you saw it there in terms of the profitability. Family farm income on beef farms is going to be well up this year. So beef values have gone up. So, ensuring that, we are largely, and if you look at the stats, the CBV on the average calf coming from the dairy herd now is improving quite dramatically. So that's going to manifest itself in a higher calf value. So that's really what I'm talking about here. Getting a better return for the calf from the system. They're going to be a valuable part of where the returns are. I suppose your point that we were kind of largely told that the calf value was limited, and that was the situation when beef price was €4. Beef price today is roughly €7. So that has changed the dynamic, and the outlook for beef is very strong. So it's very important. It'll be a very important part of the dairy farm going forward. The last piece I'll say, it's not all about the cow, and I'm wondering, is that where that question is coming from? It's not all about the cow. The role of the value and what sex semen has done, and what we can do with beef genetics in the dairy herd. That's what's given us that return. And we talk about sex semen as a cost, but potentially when you're getting that 100, maybe €150 for the calf, whatever it is, that's where you get the return back from it.
As you were speaking there, Laurence, Mercosur was ratified by the EU councils.
Okay.
But go back to the feed one before we took the question. What about the contingency? What's going to happen if we have another drought next summer and we're faced with growing 20 or 30 during the summer months when we should be growing 70?
Yeah.
What are we going to put into our cows then?
Yeah. No, really good question. And I suppose for me the big thing here is standing back from the farm, in the next couple of weeks, and ensuring that the stocking rate is right on the farm going into the year. You're not going to plan for a drought in the system, but I suppose what you're going to do is making sure that you have the appropriate stocking rate going forward. That'll put you in a better position if a drought manifests itself. When the drought manifests itself, or if the drought manifests itself, you respond accordingly. And for me, if you talk about silage and silage costs, silage buffers are quite strong on farms, right? So that should help us. But in terms of bringing in feed, I think you look at all of your options at that point. And it'll very much depend on where milk price is at. If milk prices turn the corner and we're on the way up again, well, you look at your numbers then. If milk price is still continuing to slip, you have another set of options, and that would be around, maybe it's about culling additional cows at that point. But I think that's one, you're in a better position going into that. If you have a budget, you know where you're going, and you're in a better position to make those decisions if you do that. If you don't have a budget, you know where you're going, you're exposed every day.
Yeah. With the pattern of those droughts, I'm conscious that every part of the country got it last year, but the back ends are usually good.
Yep.
Does that change the dynamics of what you do in the summer?
Well, I suppose we just need to be able to capitalise on those back ends when they do come. Like, if you look at even last summer, and particularly in that narrow window from, probably somewhere south of here over to almost Wexford, in a very narrow window, north of Cork, they were pretty exposed in terms of drought. But, a lot of those farms were doom and gloom, very bad, July, August. And as September came, there was a complete disbelief about how quickly it turned. So being in a position to, I suppose, deal with the return and being able to capitalise on the return is really important as part of that as well.
Okay, a couple more minutes. Quick fire ones, Laurence. Labour, contractor, vet.
Yeah.
Which of those? Where could we cut costs there?
So for me, I think labour has to be the last one, because at the end of the day, there's one thing: the system will crash completely if we haven't labour and if we're not trying to manage ourselves within the system. So for me, that'd be the very last one that we cut. The first ones that you asked about contractor. The question I have around the contractor is, where are we in terms of silage stocks? Do we need to be making as much silage as we do in this year coming? Specific to this year coming, dependent on the scenario. So that, that's why I think it's specific to an individual farm. You don't, everyone, like the message going out, don't make as much silage this year, is not the right message for the group, for the audience. But it might be the right message for 20 or 30% of the audience. So for me, the key thing here, it's specific to the farm. I'm not trying to avoid the question, but it's specific to the farm.
Would you do radical changes to vet costs, let's say, in terms of vaccines? Faced with that, you did mention there was a spectrum there of costs, so that's the average for those 330 farmers in the National Farm Survey.
Yeah.
You can be sure some of them are a lot higher than that.
And if you look at it, veterinary costs is one of the ones that have increased and increased and increased. There's new additional vaccination regimes. I think what you do is, and every farm again is different, you'd stand back from it and look at every one of those costs and see what are they delivering. And I'd probably, the vaccine story is, if you look at the numbers, probably 7, 8, 10 years ago, the vaccines were probably costing €20. They're probably closer to 35 now. And the question is, what's the return for every one of those? I'm not saying that you take out vaccines. I'm saying that you stand back and you look at your numbers and you say, right, what is that giving me? And it's that process itself will be important.
I have two easy ones for you now before we end up. Sex semen.
Yeah.
Yes or no? Sex semen and zinc programs of heifers adds a lot of money.
Yeah. So first one is sex semen. I think that if we're banking on getting a higher value for the calf and getting a return for those calves, in 2026, based on the sex semen used in 25, to be pretty kind of disingenuous of us to walk away from it in 2027. So for 2027. So I would say sex semen off the table. I say still on the table, do it. In terms of synchronization, again, I would say that quite expensive, and are we getting the return for it? But So, like, you'd have to say not everyone in the room is doing it, so that option isn't there for everybody. For the people that are doing it and they do their break-even analysis and they're in a really good place, why would you not do it? For the people that do their break-even analysis and they're not in a good place, off the table. That's the way I look at it.
Any last questions? So, last one I have for you, land rent only increased by 9%, okay, we will take it.
Yeah.
Land rent increased by 9%.
Yeah.
For anyone that's renewing a lease now, where should they be looking at in terms of land rent per cost per acre, Laurence?
That was a really easy one.
Yeah, should have said the rental last.
Yeah, sure, listen, you know, like, I was talking to somebody yesterday and they said, you know, there's a lot of, you know, I suppose if you take away the headline and take away the numbers, you know, you say land rent's a huge cost in dairy farms. It's a huge cost, it's gone up so much, it's costing this. The national average is not big, right? So just to be clear, on an average dairy farm, it's not a big number. But you'd have to say that some of the stuff that was, you know, maybe that was done in the last couple of years with a milk price of 55 cents a litre and maybe 60 received, depending on the scenario, would be very, very, very questionable in 2026. So, you know, is it absolute? The one answer I'd ask there is it on the platform? If it's on the platform, you'd say to yourself, you know, that's going to be worth a completely different figure to something that's off the platform. Off the platform, you'd say to yourself, you really have to question it.
Yeah, we have a question here, but yep.
You've only grown 12 tonne on average in the last 5 years. What is the ideal stock rate?
So again, really good question, and it's going to be dealt in the next session. But you know, if you're growing 12 tonne, right, and let's be realistic about it. Growing 12 tonne, saying you're utilising 10, probably best case scenario. If we're saying that there's, you know, 4.8, 4.9 tonnes of forage going into those cows, you're talking about 2.1, 2.2 cows per acre.
I'm probably robbing this question off the lads beside me here, but you're probably talking to a lot of the most progressive farmers in the country in this room. What is the plan to try and target, you know, the rest of the milk suppliers in the country in terms of utilising more grass, trying to get side indices right? Is anything going to change over the next in that approach in the next couple of years, or what is the programme to try and reach more of those people?
Really good question, and for me, and something we're talking about internally with you know, the dairy specialists, is around some sort of a campaign around cost, double down on the message, you know, reassuring when we did this analysis. And to be honest, we weren't sure when we did this analysis, the trends, everything is telling us the same as we you know, it's like Back to the Future in terms of numbers. So that's really reassuring. So we all, and it's all of us. Not just Teagasc, or not so, maybe the journal, all of us, the grassland, everybody have a job to do to double down on the message, to ensure that, you know, I've said it to Aidan there, you know, we haven't, to be honest, you stand back from the numbers, you could get very excited and very worried about all this. There isn't a huge amount of damage done yet. It's if this continues, it's where we're in the complete and utter soup. And there's there's a lot of conflicting messages and a lot of conflicting requirements, whether, you know, for additional whatever, and we just need to be able to cut through that. And it's difficult at times. It's difficult at times with that singular message. It's really simple. And growing and utilising more grass.
Take one more, yeah. David.
Just at the start of the session, Laurence, you mentioned how our costs of production seem to have risen in the last couple of years, more so than other dairy producing countries. Can you just touch on where are we still competitive on the global stage, or where do we compare and where are the other countries going?
Very hard to do that comparison, but absolutely we're still competitive. But I was actually down in New Zealand last March, and there was a presentation given, and they put up all our figures and their figures. And, you know, by a country mile, New Zealand and Ireland were in cost reduction, we were ahead. But the relative, we had lost a little bit more ground than some of the others when these prices went up. And when you start to look today, that kind of gets clearer as to why that happened. You know, we've maybe lost a little bit of focus in the last couple of years, and it has created a small bit of slip. But we're still really in a good space. And as I've said there a second ago, no huge damage done yet, but that damage will be done if we were to continue in this direction.
Laurence, you spoke about 500 kgs of ration, and then other practitioners in colleagues of yours would be promoting 500 kgs of meat salads per cow. Are the two compatible?
It's a really, really good question. So again, and I suppose when you go back to this analysis, if we were to look at it and say, stand back from it and say, what's driving profitability? Well, the reason why that we don't generally try to talk about milk solids per cow is because you can achieve milk solids per cow whatever way you want. You can achieve it by trying to maximise grass utilisation, as you will hear two farmers in the next session say, or you can achieve it by putting in 2 tonne of concentrate. So that means that as a metric is not very strong, or is not very useful. So, when we set up our targets in terms of where we want to get to in the next 5 years as an industry, we talk about that 500 kilos of concentrate per cow. And in the model, to achieve 12 tonne utilised, we're producing somewhere close to 500 kilos of milk solids. So, but that's a kind of an outcome. We don't put that to the front, that's to the back. So for me, we don't talk about that. That's there in the background. That's an outcome of what you're doing. It's not what's driving the system. Because if we put it driving the system, and you're a farmer, you say, right, they said 500 kilos of milk solids is what I have to achieve. I can use whatever tool I have to get there. So it's just, I suppose, how we communicate it. And that's where we struggle sometimes. I completely accept that's where we struggle sometimes.
Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. 3 key takeaways for me. Number 1, know your number, which is a break-even milk price. Number 2, do your budget, which is different. Budget is looking ahead. And the third thing then is to get working on a plan, if there's a difference between the two, and then start implementing that plan. So there's plenty of help available, Laurence, I think it's fair to say. Round of applause for Laurence and the